I am now calling this meeting of the Agricultural Labor Relations Board to order. My name is Victoria Hasid, and I am the newly appointed chair of the board. And I am pleased to have our first meeting of 2020 and our first meeting with a full board and quorum in quite some time. I am very pleased to be joined by all of my board members, including my fellow newest board member, Cynthia Flores, who will be introducing herself to each of you in just a little bit. We are also joined here today by Mr. Barry Broad, Mr. Isidore Hall, and Mr. Ralph Lightstone. Also present from our staff today is our Executive Secretary, Santiago Avila Gomez, the Assistant to the Chair, Ed Haas, and Audrey Shah, who will all be providing technical support. As we are too aware, we are in very rapidly changing times, and we are doing the most we can to protect the health and safety of not only our staff, but of the public. So thus, in accordance with Governor Gavin Newsom's executive order N2920, today's meeting is being held via video conference with an option for members of the public to dial in either via the web or via telephone. As reflected on the agenda, we will have two parts to our meeting. The first part of our meeting will be open session, and we'll hear various reports from staff here at the ALRB. The second portion of our meeting I'm very excited about. It will be a panel about COVID-19 and its impact on the agricultural sector, particularly of farm workers. At the close of the panel, we'll open the meeting for public comment on any portion of the meeting. Members of the public who've contacted the board either by email or phone are asked to be placed in the public comment queue will be called in the order received. If you did not previously contact the board, you are still able to participate in the public comment, and there are several ways to do so. You can notify our staff in the WebEx chat feature, or you can email or call our staff as directed on our notice and agenda, which you can see at alrb.ca.gov. We ask that you provide your name and organization if
Excuse me, this is the court reporter. I just lost the audio feed.
Oh, thank you. I'm not sure how that happened. I'll back up a little bit. We will take public comment in order that it is received. If you did not sign up in advance, you will be able to provide public comment you can put yourself in the queue for public comment via the WebEx feature, the WebEx chat, or phone or email as provided in the agenda. If you wish to speak more than once, please contact staff and have your name placed back in the queue if you are able. If you have technical difficulties when you are called up, please reach out to us via WebEx chat function, email or phone, and we will make sure to come back to you. Given the nature of the video conferencing, we do have limited capabilities for managing participation during the meeting and during the public comment periods. So we're asking everyone who is not speaking to place their phones or WebEx on mute and wait to unmute until you are called on to speak. You can also see these instructions on our agenda, which is posted on alrb.ca.gov. With that, we will now proceed with the open session. Our first agenda item is the introduction of our new board members. I am very pleased to introduce our other new member, Cynthia Flores, who was appointed by Governor Newsom in February 2020. Cynthia, can you please take the floor and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, everyone. I'm excited to join the board and look forward to fulfilling my duties under the Act. With my experience, I bring understanding of immigration, in particular, removal defense, as well as labor law, having represented both public and private sector unions in the past. Incredibly grateful to be serving at such an important period of time in the state of California and overall in the nation, and look forward to working with everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cynthia, and welcome. So excited to get the chance to work with you. I also want to take this time to introduce myself and share a little bit about my background and also my goals for my tenure as chair of the board. First and foremost, I want to sincerely thank Governor Gavin Newsom for the privilege of appointing me to this role. It is an incredible honor, and I'm incredibly excited to serve the public, particularly farm workers and their employers. And my goal is to do right by the trust that the governor and his team have placed in me in appointing me as chair to serve for the Agricultural Labor Relations Board. I also want to thank my immediate predecessors, Genevieve Sharoma and Catherine Rivera. They have done tremendous work for the board, both in terms of promulgating and administering the ALRA, as well as tending to the board as an organization. And we have greatly benefited from all their work and their service. I also want to thank my fellow board members for their warm welcome. I'm incredibly excited to work with each of you, some of you who I've known for some time, and I'm so excited to get to work with you. I'm also excited to work with our general counsel, Julie Montgomery, and all the staff here at the board. I also want to take this moment to share a little bit about my background and my personal story so that you have a better sense of who I am and the perspective that I bring to the board. I am very much the product and the beneficiary of the American dream, and as our governor would say, the California dream. I came here, I'm a product of two very different pathways to achieving that dream. On my father's side, I am the daughter of a Jewish refugee who fled Egypt in the 1950s and made his way to the San Francisco Bay Area by way of France and New Jersey. And on my mother's side, I'm the very proud granddaughter of a Mexican-American immigrant who through hard work and education was the first in her family to go to college and get a degree from UC Berkeley, and who instilled a passion for learning and education across generations, including myself. And while these are two very different pathways to get here,
has left the meeting.
It is very much informed my perspective that the American dream is incredible and it is very attainable. And I see it as my duty in this role to ensure that I create that pathway for others. And there's a key component of that, and that's through workplace protections and rights. And that's through the work here at the ALRB and ensuring that that pathway, that access is available to the nearly 500,000 farm workers that serve California.
Has joined the meeting.
Upon the passage of the Agricultural Labor Relations Act, Governor Brown, then in his first term, said, "A law of itself can't solve human problems, but it can provide the framework. It gives for the first time a group of people in our society who at the lowest end of the economic scale, the self-determination to assert their own dignity and their own rights and their own views on what they want and what they don't want. And that is a very significant step forward. As these times have reminded us all too well, farm workers and their work are essential. There is dignity to this work, and our responsibility is to honor and do justice by that work, not just because we benefit from the fruits of farm worker labor, but because they are our mothers, our fathers, and they have families that they feed and care for, just like the rest of us. Our role as a board in this social compact is to ensure that we administer the Agricultural Labor Relations Act fairly. This leads me to the first of my two primary goals as chair. First and foremost, I aim to uphold the ALRA and ensure that through the work of the board, we are breathing life into the law, adjudicating disputes fairly, resolving matters and issues timely, and engaging in robust outreach and education to ensure workers are aware of their rights under the Act and that they have access to services provided through the board, and that employers are aware of their duties and responsibilities under the law. My second equally important goal is to ensure that I'm making sure that the board functions as a healthy and well-run organization. In my short time here, I'm already deeply impressed by the commitment and expertise of our staff, and it's my goal and responsibility to ensure that I am properly supporting the work of our staff so that they can better execute the mission and work of the ALRB and serve the public. I'm incredibly excited to be here, and I'm very excited to get on with the rest of our meeting. So thank you. Okay. We will now go on to our next item, which is to approve the minutes from January 30th, 2019. May I have a motion to approve the minutes? May I have a motion from one of my board members to approve the minutes?
Yes, this is Barry. I'll make the motion.
Yeah,
May I have a second?
This is Isidore. I moved the motion. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. And I second. Or I'll move and Barry can second.
Okay.
Great. Barry, do you second?
Sure.
All right. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Thank you. So approved. We'll move to the next item, which is the chair's report, which will be given by myself. As we are all aware, the board is currently responding to two major external events. One that we are very well aware of, as you can see by my mask, is COVID-19. And the other being the critical national and even international conversation about systemic racism sparked by the tragic death of George Floyd. First, I would like to take this time to have a moment of silence in honor of George Floyd and for the other victims of police brutality. Thank you. As an organization, we are discussing these events, and I want to share how we are addressing this issue with the board. As board members, we took an oath to the US and California constitutions to serve the public and ensure that we are affording all members of our society their rights. And in our case, our role as members of the ALRB is that we fairly adjudicate disputes and administer the ALRA. This requires an ongoing examination of racism, bias, and discrimination, both in overt and subtle forms. Like many other employers, the General Counsel and I recognize that these events and the subsequent national conversation was going to have a deep impact on our staff and would be affecting them in a myriad of ways that could be stressful and anxiety-inducing. And to that end, we reached out to our staff on June 4th to send a message that we recognize this moment, that we care about our staff, we recognize the strain that this may cause them, and that we wanted to ensure that they had the resources to process and have these conversations. We also shared that we were looking at how these events impact us as an organization and what we should be doing in our own self-examination, both in how we operate internally, as well as how we serve the public. And we made a commitment to our staff that I want to reiterate here to showcase and have you all hold us accountable, that we would have every member of our staff undergo unconscious or implicit bias training by the fall of 2020. Now, I certainly don't pretend that that is a panacea and that that will solve all ills, but we consider it an important piece of a larger conversation and something that we will be discussing with our staff. We also reached out to staff and asked them to provide us feedback, both now and going forward, on steps we should be taking to ensure that we have an inclusive and safe workplace, as we know that is the way to have the most productive workplace, and ensure that we can best serve the public as well as do right by our staff, given that we're an organization focused on workers' rights. That's something that we will continue to be updating our staff and the public on in various forums, including during this meeting. And with that, that concludes the chair's report. I'd like to open it up to my fellow board members, see if you have any comments or questions. Okay. Any members of the public? All right. I will move on to the next agenda item, which is the executive officer's report on elections, unfair labor practice complaints, hearings. Mr. Avila Gomez.
Thank you. I just turned on my video. I'm hoping everyone can hear me okay. I will first mention that the report can be found at alrb.ca.gov, our website, under public meeting notices and reports. And it covers a little more in depth each of the matters that I will report on. I will be giving a summary report here in the interest of time. And I'll start off with elections, followed by complaints, and then finally hearings and the end result of those hearings, which are decisions both by the ALJs and the administrative law judges and the board. Beginning with the election matters, notices of intent to take access, otherwise known as NAs. There were, since our last meeting on January 30th, 2019, there have been 13 NA files, 12 of those in the cannabis industry. The most recent was filed on October 3rd, 2019. Following with notices of intent to organize, there's been one since our last meeting, and that was filed on October 4th, 2019. Remaining with elections, there have been 2 petitions for elections and 2 elections held since our last meeting. One resulted in the certification as the exclusive bargaining representative of all agricultural employees at Fireworks Farms in the county of Sacramento. That bargaining representative is United Food and Commercial Workers Union local.
Has left the meeting.
Second election resulted in no labor organization being certified. The second election was held on October 11th, 2019. Moving on to complaints, Since our last meeting, there have been 23 complaints filed by the General Counsel and the various agriculture industries, including cannabis, strawberries, celery, essentially all of the crops throughout the state. Since our last meeting, there have been 14 complaints that were settled prior to hearing, the most recent of which happened in March 10th of this year. There have been 6 hearings held since our last meeting. The most recent was in January 22nd of this year, just before the shelter
Has joined the meeting.
rolled out. All of that work leads to the ALJ decisions and the board decision, especially of administrative orders. So with respect to the ALJ decisions, there have been 9 since the last board meeting. There have been 7 board decisions, the most recent being issued on April 21st. And with respect to administrative orders, there have been 16 board administrative orders issued, the most recent on June 2nd of 2020. Currently, there are 2 matters pending before the board. Both have briefing completed and await the board's action on them. That concludes the summary. As I mentioned, the report itself is found at our website, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Santiago. Do any of my board members have any questions or comments?
Has joined the meeting.
I'm good to go. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Any members of the public? Okay, thank you so much, Santiago. And with that, we will go on to our next agenda item, number 5, the litigation report by our Senior Board Counsel, Todd Ratchin. Todd?
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, I was not getting a response, so sorry. I also have submitted a report updating litigation cases involving the board since its last meeting in January 2019, which is also on the website at the location that Santiago referenced. As an overview of that report, it has been a good 1.5 years for the board in the courts. A number of our we've obtained a number of favorable decisions affirming board orders, including 3 instances where the California Supreme Court denied review of cases where board orders were affirmed. We've had 2 somewhat recent filings, both in the 5th District Court of Appeal, one filed by Wonderful Orchards, seeking review of the board's decision in 46 ALRB number 2, and one filed by the United Farm Workers of America, filed following our order in 45 ALRB number 8. One notable case to mention, in April, we received from the 9th Circuit Court of Appeal a order denying a petition for rehearing en banc in the case of Cedar Point Nursery versus Sharoma. This case involves a constitutional challenge to the board's access regulation, which is section 20900 of the board's regulations, which involves a 5th Amendment takings challenge to the board's regulation. Last year, in May of 2019, the 9th Circuit issued an opinion rejecting the growers' constitutional challenge and finding that the regulation did not affect a permanent physical occupation of their property. The growers are represented by the Pacific Legal Foundation in this case. And so following the court's recent order denying the petition for rehearing en banc, any petition for a cert petition in the United States Supreme Court is due July 28th. Again, the report that I've submitted, which is available on the website, provides further detail regarding litigation matters, but that's all I have at this point.
Thank you, Todd. Do any of the board members have any questions or comments for the litigation report? Do any members of the public have any questions or comments? Okay, thank you so much, Todd.
You're welcome.
Next is item number 6, the general counsel's report from Julie Montgomery. Julie.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
We can.
Very good, very good. I want to start by welcoming our newest appointed board members, namely our chair, Victoria Hasid, whom I had met and interacted with while she was at the Department of Industrial Relations. And so it's wonderful to have her on board. And welcome to you, Victoria, and congratulations on her appointment. And also I want to welcome board member Cynthia Flores and look forward to getting to know you as well, and very excited to have you both on the board. I also want to congratulate Member Hall for his reappointment. And it's an exciting time that we have a full board at the ALRB. So I'm really, really pleased to see that and look forward to working with all of you. So the work at the ALRB, a lot of what I think the public hears about is what the board does and board decisions, board orders. But the general counsel program is in fact where the majority of the ALRB staff work, and we do a lot of work in our regional offices, in our 5 regional offices, that never even gets to the board. And so what I like to do in these meetings is talk about what's going on in the regional offices and highlight some of the fantastic work that our regional staff have been doing that resulted in positive changes for farm workers and for our stakeholders that doesn't even get to the attention of the board. So in my report, I'm going to talk briefly about just what has been going on in our offices with the coronavirus response and how we're handling that, how we're continuing to provide services. And I'm going to talk about our outreach efforts and what we've been doing with outreach. And then I will finish with some highlights of settlements that we've achieved in our cases that were achieved prior to getting to the board. So with the COVID response, as everyone's had to deal with, it was a very rapid onset, and we had to be nimble and adapt quickly. And so initially we started having folks gradually work at home, but still go into the office to provide services. However, by the 3rd week of March or so, we realized that we could not continue to have our staff go into the office on a regular basis with the lockdown orders of the state and keep everyone safe. And so we had to make the difficult decision to close the office doors to the public. However, our services were never interrupted. The services have continued. And what we did is we with the help of our administrative unit, we got all of the office phones routed to employees' cell phones, ALRB cell phones that our staff had, and so that we could continue to respond to workers and others who contacted us. And we posted signs on the door, on our social media, on our Facebook page that we created recently. And we really sought to get the word out to let people know, even though our doors are locked, we are still here,
Has left the meeting.
and available for you. That being said, we did see a decrease in the number of charges that were filed and the number of workers who were contacting us during that time frame. So for about 2 months, we continued our work pretty much exclusively remotely. And then we also had our staff get up to speed on just new laws and resources available for people affected by coronavirus, and including the CARES Act and the FFCRA, and increased availability of sick leave, unemployment, and parental leave. And so we studied up on that so that we could give people information and provide effective referrals. We also had our staff reach out to people, everybody with pending cases or recent cases, to make sure they were aware that we were still here, we're still working, and also just to make sure that they have the resources they needed, and to make referrals to the extent people needed those resources. And then as of June 8th, we did reopen our offices again to the public, and we have limited staffing to provide for appropriate social distancing, and we put a number of measures in place, all within the recommended guidelines, recommended required guidelines by the state and federal health departments. And our staff is going into the office on a rotating basis in our regions. So we are back and we are available for the public, and we have been seeing charges come in because there are a lot of farm workers, we believe, who feel most comfortable with the face-to-face interaction. There's fear, concern, a lot of times lack of trust. People are nervous to access government resources a lot of the time, and so I think that the face-to-face interaction is more reassuring for a lot of people, and that is how a lot of folks access us. So we are glad to be back, and we've taken measures to keep our staff safe, like I said, within the guidelines. So that's what's been going on in the regions. And the other thing we've been working really hard on is closely collaborating with our labor agency and other sister labor departments to make sure that we are getting information out to farm workers in particular about coronavirus and safety and available programs and resources. So we've been collaborating, like I said, with the Labor Workforce Development Agency, as well as the Department of Industrial Relations, with their labor commissioner, and Cal OSHA. We have also we helped OSHA develop a video on their guidance for agricultural employers, and our staff went out and actually shot some of the footage that was used, and we gave input on the script, as well as voiceover translations into Mixteco. We do have 2 employees in our regions who speak Mixteco, which is an indigenous language spoken by a lot of farm workers who come from Mexico and southern Mexico. So we provided those resources. Additionally, our staff has been regularly appearing on television and radio throughout the state to provide information both in Spanish and Mixteco, not only about rights and responsibilities under the Agricultural Labor Relations Act, but also on workplace safety, right, with the coronavirus and their paid leave rights and other benefits. And our staff has appeared on Facebook Live a few times through Radio Indígena, and so that's actually available through Facebook, those pre-recorded interviews, and we have appeared on Radio Bilingüe and Univision. So we're out there in the Spanish language media and our Mixteco speaker as well
has joined the
giving
meeting.
that information to the public. And really, I've been very pleased to see our regional staff's strong commitment to the ALRB's mission during this time, and just their concern about what is happening with farm workers. I mean, they're continuing to go to work, and the agricultural industry has not stopped. They have not been sheltering in place. You can't. I saw a news headline somewhere that said you can't pick strawberries on Zoom. So they are actually going out to the fields every day, as we know, and and putting themselves at risk. And so I have been really pleased to see that our staff's level of concern and commitment to making sure that people get the information they need and that we can continue to provide the high level of service that people expect and deserve during this time, despite all of the things people are going through individually. So I've been very proud of our staff, and they've also not only been willing to help with our work, but they have stepped up and volunteered when there's been a statewide call for help, just with, with public health efforts as well as unemployment benefits, processing of unemployment benefits. And people have offered their services to help in any way they can to help Californians through this crisis. So I've been very, very pleased and proud of everyone during this time. So with that, I'll move on to settlement highlights. So we've since our last board meeting in early December, the General Counsel Program has achieved settlements for agricultural workers totaling $332,323. So that's just a rough figure of the amount of money that we brought in for farm workers to compensate them for violations under the Agricultural Labor Relations Act. And I'm just going to mention a few of these, as I know we need to move on to other matters. But we got money and back pay, reading and noticing remedies, and reinstatement offers for celery harvesting workers in Ventura County who got together and complained about mistreatment of their crew by their foreman, and they alleged they were terminated. And we investigated, substantiated allegations, and filed a complaint, and the case settled before hearing. We also
left the meeting.
Achieved a settlement for a group of workers harvesting kale, also in Ventura County, who alleged they were fired after they joined together to protest work assignments that they thought were unequal and unfair, that were causing them to lose money. Again, we filed a complaint and settled that for a little under $20,000 in back pay to those workers, as well as reading, noticing, and mailing remedies. We also achieved a settlement for some cannabis workers in Santa Barbara County who filed a charge alleging their employer retaliated against them by changing work positions and responsibilities after they complained about workplace chemical exposure. And in that case, actually, at the earlier stages of our investigation, the employer approached us and expressed a willingness to resolve the case. And so we had an early settlement of that case for a little over $7,000 for back pay, which was owed, reading and noticing. We also achieved a settlement in the Central Valley for some workers who were spraying and irrigating almond and pistachio orchards, who claimed they were unlawfully demoted after complaining about supervisor mistreatment, and they were offered reinstatement, and they settled for back pay of over $6,500 reading and noticing. And then we also achieved a settlement for some workers harvesting and thinning various crops in Monterey County. They were working with spinach, beets, and carrots, and they filed a charge alleging they were terminated from their employment after complaining about company hiring rules. And we investigated, again, filed a complaint, and that case settled prior to hearing for $23,000 to the workers, which was owed back pay, as well as reading and noticing. And so that's just a small sample of some of the settlements we've achieved and the cases that our staff has been working on. And most of these were achieved since the lockdown. So even though we're working primarily remotely, the work is continuing. We've also, as you can see from the other reports that people have given, we're continuing to file complaints and move our cases forward. So with that, I'll just ask if there are any questions.
Thank you, Julie. I first want to say thank you so much to all of the staff, to reiterate your gratitude for them, and I'd like to say my admiration for them for pivoting during a time of just frankly great stress personally and professionally. We're having to be really creative, and I've seen both in the efforts you've mentioned with volunteering to help with unemployment calls, volunteering to support contact tracing efforts, and a myriad of other ways directly related to our work that they've really pivoted and been nimble and really led with a public service mindset. And so just really appreciative of that and impressed. I do have a question, but I'd like to open it up for my colleagues to see if they have any questions for you. Okay, well, if
This
anyone
is
has
Ralph.
another question, jump in.
This is Ralph.
Go ahead,
No,
Ralph.
no questions. I just want to second your comments. And express our appreciation to all the work the staff's been doing under these difficult circumstances. So thank you, Julie, your team.
Thank you.
My question is, you mentioned that since the onset of the pandemic, and as we've shifted, there has been a decrease in communications. I'm wondering, though, if you have any either objective data or even anecdotal data about the nature of the communications you are still receiving. Are they about general rights under the ALRA, or is it taken on a COVID focus around health and safety issues or paid sick leave or anything of that nature that's now more sensitive due to the pandemic?
Yeah, it really varies. We haven't been getting charges that are specifically COVID related. However, we do get calls with questions and people expressing concerns. We've talked to quite a number of workers who have expressed concerns about what's going on in their workplace and being worried that adequate protections are not being provided. And so people have been asking a lot of questions about what is an employer's obligation for example, social distancing, personal protective equipment, et cetera. And so we've been giving people adequate or the appropriate resources and information in response to those concerns. But but other than people expressing concerns, we haven't been seeing a large number of charges being filed with COVID-related concerted activity, for example. However, people still are engaging in work stoppages and other concerted activity, and they are still filing charges. So I really think it varies by the office and the area in terms of whether people primarily contact us in person versus by other means. So some offices, I think, have been impacted more by the closure than others were. But in any event, we are back and people are starting to access us more, which is good to see.
Awesome. I'm really pleased to hear, I saw the video that you referenced earlier, and I'm so pleased that was in Mixteco, and that you're also utilizing radio and podcasts as a method. Are you finding that workers are able to access our services via the web and online, or is that a challenge that you and your staff are struggling with as we try and figure out how to communicate when we're not supposed to be seeing each other in person, if we can help it?
Right. Well, it's certainly one avenue of communication, and there are a good number of people who do access social media. However, there is a large percentage who don't. I think it really varies, right? I think a lot of people have smartphones and may be able to access Facebook or other apps, not necessarily have a computer with an email address, right? So there's various means through which people can access media. But we've really found that it varies, that with some groups of workers, they're not online, they're not on social media. And you really do need to access them in person to get information to them. But there is also an increasing number of people who are using social media platforms, and we've identified that as a very critical means of information sharing. And so we are working hard to get up to speed to provide information and outreach through that medium, as of course our opportunities for in-person outreach are reduced right now.
Got it. Thank you. Okay, any other questions or comments? Any questions or comments from members of the public? Okay, thank you so much, Julie. Next is agenda item number 7, which is our Division of Administration Services report. So I'd like to welcome our Chief of Admin, Brian Dougherty, to share his report with us. Brian?
Thank you, Victoria. My name is Brian Dougherty. I'm the Chief of Administrative Services for ALRB. So I'll start with kind of a brief overview of kind of where we're at from a fiscal standpoint. For the fiscal year 2019-20, we had an operating budget at ALRB of approximately $11.3 million. And through the month of May, we've expended approximately $9.6 million. We're projecting to expend a total of about $10.5 million through the rest of the fiscal year, which ends June 30th, 2020, which would leave us with an operating reserve unspent balance of about $860,000. Vast majority of that being savings that were associated with vacant positions that were not filled. We did not have all 5 board positions filled until late into the fiscal year. We also, for the current year, implemented budget letter 20-11, which was the current year expenditure reduction plan that was put in place for all state agencies effective April 30th, which reduced department's ability to expend purchase orders and contracts except under strict guidelines specifically related to either telecommunication expenses, COVID related expenses, or other time sensitive related purchases. So that will explain why we're projecting such a significant reserve. The $860,000 represents about 7.5% of our total budget. From a budget planning perspective for fiscal year 2021, we did have one budget change proposal which was approved, and that was resources that were included in a labor and workforce development agency BCP that included resources for both LWDA, Department of Industrial Relations, and ALRB. What was approved in the final budget was a $20 million allocation that will be divided amongst those 3 agencies, and that $20 million will be available for a 3-year expenditure period. We're continuing to work closely with LWDA to finalize the amount that will ultimately be going to ALRB. But specifically, the resources that we're anticipating receiving will be additional positions in our general counsel program to provide outreach services to farm workers and closely collaborating with some of the work that DIR does as well. So once we kind of have those final budget allocations, I'll be sure to share that out with the board as well. Lastly, from a hiring perspective, we currently have 66 staff on board at ALRB, and that makes up is made up of all permanent positions, retired annuitants, and student assistants. So even our temporary workers are included in that count. We currently have 5 vacancies. There's 1 in the administration division, and then 2 each in the general counsel and board areas that are actively recruiting for. And so that's kind of the latest update I have for Administrative Services Division. I would also, from a COVID related update, during the work from home perspective, administration division staff have been in the office on a rotational basis, so that we've been continuing to ensure that all mail bills and communications are being distributed appropriately. We worked quite hard. Rafael Diaz, our IT support, was able to ensure that we could get all of our users to be able to work remotely, spin up a new VPN system so that we can ensure that our telework environment was safe and secure, and we were able to procure additional WebEx licenses to ensure
Has
that we
joined the
could
meeting.
communicate effectively as an organization, while the vast majority were working remotely, and our field offices, regional offices were closed to the public. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody may have.
Thank you so much, Brian. I first want to just extend a huge thank you and congratulations to you and to each of your team. For those of you, we're a small agency, we're one deep, and we actually do have a vacancy in admin right now, but Brian and his team have really gone above and beyond to get everyone safely online. They provided us supplies so we can be safe here at the office: masks, hand sanitizer, glove, wipes, and really taken a worker-focused approach to ensuring that we're all safe and that we're able to deliver our mission efficiently. And it's a lot for anyone, let alone a small team. So I just really want to say thank you. You guys have done a really great job, and I really appreciate it. I don't have any questions. Colleagues, do you guys have any questions or comments?
No questions, just second your praise for the admin unit. Done a great job. Thank you.
Thank you, appreciate it.
And do any members of the public have any comments or questions? Okay, with that, we will go to the next agenda item, number 8, the regulations report. Todd?
Hi, thank you, Victoria. There's currently no regulatory activity to report on.
Okay. Do any of my board members have any comments or questions?
Yes, I do.
Go ahead, Barry.
Yeah, I would, through the chair, ask that we, that the executive director work with our board council to identify regulations that may need updating. Not necessarily substantive changes, although they could be substantive changes, but some of our, as we've done our cases, some of our regulations seem to have been, drafted a while ago, and deadlines and time issues are, some of them are related to the Postal Service and postmarks, and there are now electronic means of filing documents, and I think maybe some of our regulations should be reviewed internally to see whether they need to be cleaned up.
Thank you, Barry. I think that's a really good point, and I will work with our executive secretary and Todd and our colleagues and our other external stakeholders well to solicit input on things that may need some updating or modernization, so that we're running like a 21st century board and easing any burdens or things like that.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Any comments or questions from members of the public? Okay, next I'll move on to agenda item number 9, the legislation report. Todd?
Hi, there currently is no legislation pending to amend the Agricultural Labor Relations Act or that would affect the board. So there is nothing new to report on legislation.
Okay. Any comments or questions from my fellow board members? Any questions or comments from members of the public? Okay, moving on to agenda item number 10, the personnel report. The board does not have any personnel items to report. So now I'll move on to the second piece of our open session, which I'm very excited about, which is agenda item number 11. This is an informational panel on COVID-19 and its impact on the agricultural industry, and particularly on farm workers. As we all know all too well, COVID-19 has radically impacted how we all live our lives, including how we work. Given the board's mission and focus, we wanted to learn more about COVID-19 and its impact on farm workers, given that they have been a very much highlighted essential service. But this is a very unique industry and a unique worker population, and we felt it was critical to learn more about this emerging pandemic, how it's impacting them, and what are some of the new actions that state regulators have put in place in order to ensure workplace health and safety and various protections. I do want to signpost that we anticipate this to be the first of at least 2 meetings where we address this issue substantively, given the magnitude of this issue and all and its importance. We really wanted to do justice to each topic and really get into detail and not just have it be too rushed. And so for this meeting, we're going to be hearing from health and safety experts who specialize in agricultural health and safety, as well as government regulators, Cal OSHA, and the Labor Commissioner's Office. We will be having another public meeting in August at a date to be determined. And we hope to have members from the labor community, employers, as well as community-based organizations to speak about what is happening on the ground and talk about the impact of COVID-19 at that time. So we certainly welcome those comments during the public comment meeting, but I just want to share that with the public that we really do want to be very thorough as we discuss this critically important topic that's, you know, impacting the whole world and certainly this industry. Our first panel is a presentation by the Western Center for Agricultural Health and Safety. Our first panelists are Dr. Kent Pinkerton, Professor of Pediatrics in the School of Medicine at UC Davis, and the Director for the Western Center for Agricultural Health and Safety. He's joined by Ms. Heather Ridden, the Agricultural Health and Safety Program Director in the Department of Public Health and Science and the Western Center for Agricultural Health and Safety. Dr. Pinkerton, I hand it over to you.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity and thank the Agricultural Labor Relations Board for inviting us to present on COVID-19. Like many others, we have been very much involved in the last 3 months, dedicating much of our time to COVID-19. The Western Center for Agricultural Health and Safety is a multidisciplinary research center based at UC Davis. We are funded by the Centers for Disease Control through the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, and we're one of 11 regional ag centers across the country. We have a 25-year history of conducting research and outreach on occupational health and safety in agriculture across the West. Over the course of its history, the Western Ag Center has conducted research on a wide variety of topics, including heat illness, ergonomics in agriculture, ATV safety, pesticide safety, and air quality. We also conduct trainings across the state in English and Spanish on heat illness, sexual harassment prevention, injury, illness prevention, pesticide safety, and wildfire smoke exposure. Now I'll give a brief overview of COVID-19. COVID-19 is a novel form of coronavirus first identified in 2019. We believe COVID-19 is primarily spread from person to person. People who are in close contact, that is closer than 6 feet, can spread the virus. When an infected person breathes, talks, coughs, or sneezes, respiratory droplets containing the virus may be inhaled by people nearby and land on nearby surfaces. If someone touches this surface and then touches their mouth, nose, or eyes without first washing their hands, the virus can enter the body. People with COVID-19 have a wide range of symptoms, from mild symptoms to severe illness, and we are learning more about how the virus affects the body every day. You may have noticed that the list of common symptoms on the CDC website has changed between mid-March and now, as new symptoms have been added. Symptoms typically appear within 2 to 14 days of exposure and may include a fever or chills, a cough, shortness of breath or difficult breathing, fatigue, muscle or body aches, headache, new loss of taste or smell, sore throat, congestion or runny nose, nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. Unlike the SARS and previous coronaviruses, people can be contagious even if they are pre-symptomatic or asymptomatic. Some people are more vulnerable to developing severe symptoms. Based on what we know at the present time, those at high risk for severe illness from COVID-19 are people who are 65 years and older in age, people who live in a nursing home or long-term care facility, people of all ages with underlying medical conditions, particularly if not well controlled, including chronic lung disease or moderate to severe asthma, serious health conditions, immunocompromised individuals, severe obesity, diabetes, chronic disease, kidney disease, and liver disease. Now I'll turn this over to Heather Ryden, who will describe our center's efforts in responding to COVID-19.
Great, thank you, Kent. And thank you again to the Agricultural Labor Relations Board for inviting us to present. Today, as Kent indicated, I'll describe our center's response to COVID-19, farm worker vulnerability, and what we know about COVID-19 cases among farm workers. As has been alluded to, on March 19th, in conjunction with Governor Newsom's stay-at-home order, the food and agricultural sector was considered an essential business and continued to work. While we had not yet heard of any COVID-19 cases in California agriculture, we at the center recognized the likelihood that workers were vulnerable to infection due to the nature of their work. In mid-March, we sent our first communication to our network with basic facts about COVID-19. And within days of the governor's announcement, we were meeting frequently with external advisory board members and other stakeholders to determine our best response. Based on these conversations and our areas of expertise, on March 31st, we published an ag employer checklist in English and Spanish with recommendations for screening workers, sanitation and hygiene, physical distancing, and how to communicate workplace best practices to workers. 2 weeks later, we published a tailgate training guide for employers to use with their workers. The materials are straightforward and practical with the intention of providing clear recommendations to prevent COVID-19 at the ag workplace. Throughout May, Dr. Pinkerton and I were actively involved in the development of the CDC interim guidance for agricultural workplaces, guidance that is intended to give broad recommendations and recognizes the diversity of agriculture across the country. So as I mentioned, the agricultural industry has been widely reported as being vulnerable to COVID-19, and we're seeing this in daily news reports. This is due in part to the way in which the work is done. California agriculture is very labor intensive. This often means that farm workers are in close proximity in fields or in packing lines. As an essential business, work has not ceased for the many farms and farm workers throughout the state. Workplace adaptations recommended for the ag workplace include physical distancing, the use of cloth face coverings, the use of barriers between workers, increased hand washing, and workplace disinfection, among others. Another often recommended practice is that of screening workers. Because COVID-19 can spread when someone is pre-symptomatic or when someone has the virus but is asymptomatic, controls including physical distancing and cloth face coverings are particularly important. And now to talk more specifically about farm workers and their characteristics and some of their risk factors, I'll mention that social determinants of health, such as economic status, access to healthcare, and housing contribute to farm worker vulnerability and their ability to respond to COVID-19. As you may know, California farm workers have higher rates of chronic disease than California Latinos overall and the California population generally. Nearly 40% of farm workers are obese, 10% more than the California population overall. Farm workers also have higher rates of diabetes and hypertension. In contrast, they have dramatically lower rates of health insurance coverage. It is important to connect the chronic diseases experienced by farm workers with recent data about COVID-19. On June 15th, a morbidity and mortality weekly report was released by the CDC, stating that hospitalizations were 6 times higher and deaths 12 times higher for COVID-19 patients with underlying conditions. The most frequently reported underlying conditions in the report were cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and chronic lung disease, the first 2 of which we've already alluded to as being more prevalent among farm workers. In addition, many farm workers live in crowded housing and use shared transportation. These realities may increase their risk of contracting COVID-19.
Margaret Reeves
has left the meeting.
They also make the isolation of someone who's infected very challenging. So what do we know about COVID-19 among farm workers? There have been reports of COVID-19 outbreaks among agricultural workers in other parts of the country, cases in Immokalee, Florida, among tomato harvesters, and in Yakima, Washington, in the apple industry have been widely publicized. In California, there have been reports of outbreaks in Monterey, Solano, Tulare, and Ventura counties. Some of these outbreaks have occurred in packing houses, while others are among field workers. A question that we've asked, and we've been asked many times, is how many farm workers have tested positive for COVID-19? And the bottom line is we just don't know. Like others throughout the state, we are reading news reports and have heard from community organizations about outbreaks. However, we do not have sufficient data to know the full story. Nationally, testing methods have varied and evolved over time. Therefore, tracking and reporting of positive cases, which is often carried out at the local level, is not systematic. In California, at the county level, Monterey is the only county that we are aware of that provides a daily situation report that includes industry. As of Monday, yesterday, Monterey County reported 1,291 confirmed cases of COVID-19, 475 of which were in agriculture. This means that 37% of all COVID-19 cases in Monterey County were in agriculture. However, 20% of confirmed cases have an unknown or under investigation industry category, meaning that figure for agriculture may be higher. From our understanding, it is impossible to know if Monterey County is an outlier or the norm for agricultural communities. We are concerned that the collection of critical data may not be occurring systematically across the state, oftentimes leaving out occupation, without which it is impossible to know how many farm workers are affected. And in some cases, race and ethnicity are also not being collected. Or at the very least, this information is not immediately publicly available, which makes responding to the crisis in a targeted and immediate manner dependent on anecdotal reports. We know that county departments of public health are responding to a once-in-a-lifetime crisis. However, we cannot understate the importance of collecting and disseminating this type of data. Despite the great work that's being done across the country and in California to reduce the spread of COVID-19 and the guidance we and others have disseminated for the ag industry, we know that growers, employers, and workers continue to face challenges on a daily basis. To better understand these challenges, as well as to hear about practical solutions and success stories, we are conducting an online survey of farmers, farm labor contractors, and ag supervisors. We are also part of a group of researchers and organizations conducting the COVID-19 Farm Worker Study. The study is surveying farm workers throughout California about their experiences with COVID-19. Our hope is that information from both projects will provide a more detailed picture of the experiences of farm workers and the strategies farmers are employing to reduce the spread of COVID-19. So with that, I'll say that Dr. Pinkerton and I hope that the overview was helpful, and we're happy to answer any questions that you may have now or in the future. The central website, aghealth.ucdavis.edu, has all of the resources that we developed, as well as answers to frequently asked questions. So thank you, and we're happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pinkerton, also Ms. Ridden, for that wonderful overview and sharing some of those highlights. I certainly have a few questions, but would like to open the floor to my colleagues to see if any of my fellow board members have questions or comments for our panelists.
Yeah, thank you so much for that very thorough presentation. I'm curious to see, so I know that you mentioned there's a couple of workplace recommendations to adapt the workforce to prevent the spread of COVID. You did mention installing barriers. That would be in, how would you operationalize that? I just have a kind of hard time conceptualizing what that would look like.
Sure, I can take a stab at that, and then maybe Dr. Pinkerton, you can jump in. So one of the challenges that I think the agricultural industry has faced is that many of their practices are based on the equipment that they use and the way in which the crop is planted. And so there might be a large harvest machine that is going down, field rows where individuals are spaced at closer than 6 feet oftentimes due to the way the rows in the machine are built. And so some growers have been adding plexiglass partitions between the workers, similar to what maybe you've seen in grocery stores, as a way of reducing the potential spread of respiratory droplets from one worker to another. It is absolutely still advisable to be wearing cloth face coverings, even during that process.
And I would just further echo what Heather has said, that really the face cloth coverings are really critical to help reduce that spread of the respiratory droplets, especially when we cannot really physically separate ourselves by more than 6 feet.
So are those plexiglass dividers being used actually in the field, in the rows, on some kind of machine, or how's that working?
I believe so. I've seen many pictures and heard from some growers that they're installing them on the equipment. So it's not, no workers are not carrying them. They are installed on the equipment. And so the divides move with the machinery. In some cases, there's tomato harvesters and transplanters that also have these divides that are able to be placed between workers. So they're semi-permanently attached.
I think it's also important to just keep in mind that a lot of the innovation and the prevention to the spread of respiratory droplets is really being undertaken by the farm owners themselves. And as they look at what their needs are for their particular operations of harvesting and field work, that they're also coming up with some really novel ideas that we hope to learn more about as time goes on and as the field and harvesting season continues.
Great. Cynthia, do you have any other questions?
Yeah, I'm not sure if you all will know the answer to this question, but I was very stunned to hear that there's a high rate of chronic illness in the farm worker community. I'm wondering, do you have a recommendation as to how to communicate with farm workers directly that may be suffering from chronic illness and spreading information in a effective method to reach folks, especially during these times we're seeing that we may not be able to have direct contact with individuals. So is there maybe like a community outreach strategy that you would recommend, especially given the fact that folks don't have or don't usually have access to traditional healthcare coverage?
Sure. Yeah, I think that regardless of the topic, communication and sharing of information with farm workers is something that's really important. And we have found that it is the community-based organizations that have trust and relationships with farm workers that are the most critical piece in sharing information. And so what we as a center have tried to do is, and are continuing to try to do, is build relationships with those organizations so that we can try to support them with scientific information and in some cases resources that they then can take and distribute to their communities in the trusted dialogue that happens in the appropriate language and so forth. And so we consider them a vital partner in that.
And I'd just like to add that one of the things that we've done that has been really instrumental under Heather and her staff is the designing of checklists and training materials that are very simple and straightforward. And we've been able to disseminate this across the state through postal services and through other mechanisms so that we can actually provide those materials so that even the workers and the owners could actually provide their own simple training and information to their workers.
Excellent. Okay, any for any of our colleagues on WebEx or on the phone, do you have any questions for or comments for our panel, our first panelists?
I have a question. Can you hear me?
I can, Barry. We can.
Okay. So my question is, who exactly is getting health and safety information? Like what organizations and entities are getting that information to farm workers, and how are growers and farm labor contractors who's advising them on what they need to do? And sort of a related question is, are they doing it, in your opinion?
Again, I think Heather would be able to answer that best. But again, that's a really important question.
Yeah, I think that I would say that we are the entities that tries to share and information and recommendations with growers, farm labor contractors, and others. And we do that in a similar way as we do with farm workers through community-based organizations. There are many grower associations and farm labor contractor associations who we have relationships with. And so we have been in communication with them, both in the development of the resources to make sure that they made sense to or would make sense to their membership, and then also in the dissemination of the resources. And so, you know, I think that we can always do better, but so far we feel like we have communicated that out in a pretty robust way. Our resources are linked on over 50 different websites of different associations, CDFA, other organizations where I think growers are very much more likely to go for information. So we're always looking for those opportunities. To answer your second question, unfortunately, I don't think we have a concrete way of knowing exactly what is happening in the field, which is one reason why we launched this farmer, grower, ag employer, and supervisor survey. So we can hear from them what they're doing, what practices they've implemented, which ones they haven't implemented and why, because there might be barriers that we can try to address through either education and outreach or new development of tools. And so that survey is still open. We're hoping to get many more responses, and that will help guide our next steps.
Okay, I have a follow-up question, and that is, we've heard in the news about, you know, certain workplaces that have been kind of COVID hotspots, like meat packing plants in particular. Are there areas, even if they're not in California, in which there are have been sort of hotspots, similar type of outbreaks in agriculture?
So Immokalee, Florida, with the tomato harvesters, I think is considered a hotspot, and I believe CDC is down on the ground there now. I also believe that in Yakima, Washington, the apple, I believe those are packing plants opposed to harvesters, but that is also, I believe, considered a hotspot, and CDC is on the ground there as well, with working with the local public health departments.
I think that really is the challenge, is when the workers are in an enclosed area and in close proximity, that the potential for the spread of infection is much greater.
This is Victoria. That leads to another question I have that I don't know how much either of you could speak to this, but farm workers are a unique population where there's farm worker housing. And there's also a lot of common communal transportation and carpooling to get to remote work sites. Can you talk about any efforts that employers or organizations or other entities may be using to help mitigate and reduce the spread in those kind of common connection points that this population has that maybe other workplaces don't?
Okay, the silence tells me I should jump in. I think that this has been one of the more challenging areas for us to think about because there are so many factors that are both workplace based and then also community based. And we have heard, and the CDC guidance and other guidances that have been released give recommendations around transportation and housing. This was primarily targeting the H-2A workers because employers provide those services as part of the employment arrangement. But, in shared housing, it's recommended that people sleep foot to foot, so their heads and their breathing is as far away as possible. It's another recommendation when possible is that crews, people who work together also transport and reside together when that is something that is managed by the employer, so that the same people are around the same quote unquote germs all the time, opposed to exposing potentially new people. We've also seen recommendations for transportation around having fewer people in a vehicle at a time. So there are recommendations out there. Whether and how much they are being utilized, I don't have that information. I'm not sure that it's currently being collected in a systematic way other than anecdotal stories.
And I would say that also, although it would be natural for people to be aware of this, anytime that folks are close together, that the face coverings are essential.
Thank you. Hi, this is Julie Montgomery. I have a follow-up question. So you mentioned H-2A workers, and I'm wondering if you're aware of efforts to do outreach specifically to H-2A employers and workers. In our experience, they are more isolated and harder to reach just as a group. And of course, as you all have mentioned, there are the concerns of housing and transportation with H-2As in particular, although it's not unique to them. But certainly they're an employer-provided housing and often bussed around. So do you know if there's any specific targeting of that workforce going with COVID safety issues?
There might be in some of our other ag centers around the country. So up in Washington and then also on the East Coast, I believe that the number of H-2A workers is greater. We have not yet focused our attention specifically there. I think we're at a point in our response of information gathering and identifying where we should put our efforts next. And I would say that this population is an example that is on that list that we might need to consider targeting.
Yeah, I think that's important. Thank you.
Yeah, and I was just going to say that many of our contacts are with labor contractors who are aware of those individuals, and that is also somewhat of a help to us in knowing who we're reaching out to.
Thank you.
One of the questions that I've had, I heard certain news reports about some populations early on believing that they couldn't be infected by the virus or that they were not as susceptible. Have you encountered any of that misinformation in some of the communications you've had? And if so, what have you done to overcome that?
Yeah, I think that agriculture, like any other group of people in the country, is susceptible to misinformation. And I think that there is a wide range of beliefs and understanding about COVID-19. And so this again gets to the importance of community organizations and trusted leaders, because when people hear many different messages from news and government and just all the different sources, it's really, really critical that they have a trusted place to go for accurate information. And so that would be, again, one of the reasons why we have tried to stay in close contact with community-based organizations who are then communicating with workers. And we take the same approach on the employer side. So we're in close communication with grower associations, employer associations to get that information out to their networks. But yes, like other parts of the country, I would say there is a subset of employers and workers who may not understand the seriousness of COVID-19.
Another question I had, you highlighted that the farm worker population has a disproportionate lack of insurance coverage, which obviously is problematic anytime, let alone during a pandemic. Can you speak to the availability of testing and then care in farm worker populations? Are there any interesting initiatives or community efforts or even state or federal efforts that the community should be aware of and that you want to highlight?
Kent, do you want to take that? Or I have a few thoughts, but I'll let you go.
Yeah. Well, from my perspective, I'm not really aware of any special testing or initiatives that are directly towards the agricultural community. Unfortunately, most testing is only done when one is suspected of having that infection. And so that has been a problem, a chronic problem, I think, over the last several months, especially the 3
I'm sorry, this is the court reporter. I just lost my internet where I am for about, probably as many as 4 minutes. It was right when Julia Montgomery started to speak. Should we try to recapitulate what I missed? I'm back on now, but
I appreciate that. I don't think we need to do that since this is a judicial proceeding. So let's just, if Dr. Pinkerton could continue with responding to the question, we'll just.
Very well. Thank you so much. And my profound
technology.
Right indeed. Thank you.
Okay, sorry about that, Dr. Pinkerton. You were talking about how lack of testing is a chronic problem, I believe.
Yes, I mean, and I think we are all aware of that, that is at the heart of why we're having so many problems with understanding these conditions where we continue to see lulls and then spikes in the number of those people who are infected. But I'll turn the time over to Heather, who may actually be more informed than I am of what initiatives there might be within the agricultural community for testing.
Yeah, I don't actually know of a whole lot other than to say that our sense is that testing is increasing in general across the state, and that includes agricultural workers. There is a group that I know someone will include in the chat. I forget where they're located, but they're backpack medics, something of this sort, where they have actually gone to the field. So instead of, they're not affiliated with the employer or other groups. They come and independently test workers. And so once again, I think that it's really important to consider who's doing testing, who's doing transporting of individuals who might be infected, and the considerations for whether or not infected individuals can safely isolate. I would also add that testing itself can be it's a snapshot. It's a one-time picture, and so things like contact tracing and ideally community-based contact tracing with trusted networks is something that I think is really important in this population.
Building off of that last comment, I imagine, like you mentioned, I think sometimes there is a mistrust with this worker population and government entities. Are you hearing about any innovative strategies with contact tracing or any challenges just in general with contact tracing with this specific to this worker population?
I would have to follow up. I know that there are many community organizations that are talking to each other on a very regular basis about rolling out contact tracing. And so those efforts have started. and I can follow up with more information.
Thank you. That was about 5 questions. This is my last question. Barry, Ralph, or Isidore, do you have any questions or comments for our panelists?
Yeah, this is Ralph. A couple of questions. They go back to the earlier part of the presentation, and thank you for coming and giving us all this information. You mentioned the outbreaks in Yakima and Immokalee, I think, that are being tracked. Do we know of any emerging hotspots in California right now? That's one question. And I'll just add the second one, which is, I think you mentioned that there's in the data that is being collected by the counties, there's kind of a lack of industry slash occupation or maybe ethnic data. Is there movement to correct that so that we get more information as they report?
I'll just mention one area that I'm a bit concerned about because we spend so much time in Imperial County in Southern California, that has been a particular hotspot. And with so many increases in the number of cases that it's overwhelmed the hospitals in Imperial County, that they've had to life flight those patients into other areas. Now, whether that is really based on agriculture or just simply the exchange of workers across the border, because much of the agricultural efforts in Imperial County are accomplished by people coming from Mexico who have by citizenship or have work permits for them to allow to come in. Again, Heather might be aware of other areas that might be more agricultural specific.
Yeah, so I spent a lot of time yesterday trying to catch up and make sure I was up to date on any potential outbreaks in California. And it's amazing. I don't think I've ever seen so many news articles written about farm workers. I think that we have a unique opportunity to be thinking about worker health and safety right now. So I don't know what the definition of outbreak is. So I'm not sure if that is the appropriate word, but in Santa Paula and Ventura County, there were around 44 employees who tested positive at an avocado packing plant. In Dinuba in Tulare County at a frozen food plant, there were 174 cases. I believe that these fall perhaps outside of the ALRA, but it still is a similar population and in agricultural communities. Recently, there was about 46 cases reported in Solano County in Fairfield. And the thinking is that they might have been vineyard workers from up in the Sonoma-Napa area. And then I've also heard a lot of concerns from colleagues in the San Joaquin Valley, just in Fresno, Kern, in those regions about, another crew went down, this is happening. So I think there might be things happening that there probably are cases that are happening in agricultural communities and among agricultural workers that are not surfacing to the news. And that is especially important when you think, or why it is especially important for public health departments to be systematically collecting occupation. As far as whether there's a movement to do that, I hope conversations like this are helpful. I know other researchers that I've been working with have made calls to public health departments. And, in all fairness, they are dramatically overwhelmed with the situation. I would propose that occupation, race, ethnicity can be part of a standard data collection that's important across time, not only during a crisis, but we're seeing the importance of it now.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then I think we have one comment from our executive secretary just about some of our access issues. Santiago? Okay, well, Santiago may join us in a second. You're on mute, Santiago. Santiago.
Yes, I had muted everyone else and forgot to unmute myself. I wanted to quickly invite and encourage ADB from Líderes Campesinas to share her important comment that she had he or she had put in the chat function. The chat function was supposed to be restricted, however, it's not working as designed, and it does not become part of our public record until someone chooses to make a public comment so that the reporter can record it. So I invite and encourage you, of course, not a requirement, but anyone who wishes to make a public comment, please know that the chat function is not being used for that purpose, and it is not being recorded as part of our minutes and record for this meeting.
De indicarle a la gente que está en un chat que si alguien está ahí, lamentablemente esa función no está trabajando en este momento para que alguien haga un comentario por medio del chat, dijo el señor Santiago.
Thank you very much. Ralph, did you have any other questions?
Not for now, thank you.
Okay.
So someone else does, thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions for my board members? Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Pinkerton and Heather. Really appreciate you joining. If you could please stick around, we will be opening this up for public comment at the end of our the rest of our panelists, and there may be some other questions or comments from the public that we would benefit from at this time. At this time, for the second portion of our panel, we'll be hearing from some of our lead workplace enforcement entities. My old colleagues.
Victoria,
yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt. We do have one public comment at this time, if you're able to take it.
Yes, we will. We're able to take that public comment.
Right. ALRB, you are free to make your comment.
Hi, thank you very much. My name is Irene or Irene, and I'm with Líderes Campesinas. So thank you. I wasn't sure how this commenting chat here works, but I did just want to share what I shared in the comment. And I really appreciate hearing Heather and also partnering with Heather as a community-based organization that really depends a lot on their resources and our communication and collaboration. But one huge sort of initiative mission that Líderes Campesinas, we are a network of women farm worker leaders and their families throughout the state of California. And so we have really been pushing for health professionals to go to the fields. We're very focused on prevention. And so early on, we did find that there was inadequate education being given by the supervisors. And we collected several testimonies and feedback and wrote a letter to the governor regarding this. And with the collaboration of the backpack medicine team that Heather mentioned, we have found that it's been extremely successful to go to the fields and give this education because of that inaccessibility to healthcare that many farm workers have, right, due to immigration issues and certain fears. So we have found that this interaction with a health professional is a basic human right that makes a huge difference, right, in how serious they take the illness, and also builds that trust with their doctors. And so I just wanted to note there that that it is a statewide effort, one by one, county by county. We are trying hard to get healthcare professionals to visit the fields, and any help from an agency like the ALRB is extremely appreciated. And thank you again to Heather and Mr. Pinkerton and all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your public comment. And I understand we have another commenter, Santiago.
Yes, Noé Paramo of the California Rural Legal Assistance Foundation. Go ahead, Noé.
Okay, we may, can you try and unmute yourself? Okay, in the interest of time, we're going to keep going to our next panelist, but we will make an effort to come back to you. There'll be other opportunities for public comment. So with that, I'd like to go to our second group of panelists who are from some of my old coworkers at the Department of Industrial Relations. They are our lead workplace enforcement entities for the state. we have representatives from Cal OSHA and the Labor Commissioner's Office. Our first speaker will be Cal OSHA's Program Manager for Communications and Strategic Planning, Brandon Hart, and he will provide an overview of relevant occupational safety and health standards, early complaint data, and review Cal OSHA's COVID-19 agricultural industry specific guidance. Brandon, welcome.
Hi, thank you. Thank you, Chairwoman Victoria Hasid. Before I begin my presentation, I'd like to thank the Agricultural Labor Relations Board for inviting Cal OSHA to present to the board and provide the public who are in attendance with updates and information on our very important work, and also congratulate Chairwoman Victoria Hasid on her recent appointment. The governor made a very fine choice. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with Cal OSHA is mandated to protect and improve the health and safety of California's workers and the safety of passengers riding on elevators, amusement rides, and tramways through the following activities. We set and enforce standards. We provide outreach, education, and assistance. We issue permits, licenses, certifications, registrations, and approvals. As Victoria mentioned in today's presentation, I'll be sharing information specifically on the overview of applicable workplace health and safety standards in agriculture related to COVID-19, an overview of COVID-19 agriculture-specific guidance that has been published by Cal OSHA, and Cal OSHA's public enforcement statistics, Cal OSHA's consultation services that are available for agriculture employers, and outreach for workers and how they can file a complaint with Cal OSHA for unsafe or unhealthful work conditions. Regarding the overview of applicable workplace health and safety standards in agricultural related work to COVID-19, there is no specific or unique safety or health standard or regulation specific to the novel coronavirus. For example, like emergency wildfire smoke regulation. However, there are current and existing regulations that Cal OSHA may use and employers should follow to mitigate the risk to workers who perform agricultural related work. Under Title 8, Section 3203, employers are required to establish an effective injury and illness prevention program in writing and evaluate unsafe or unhealthful work conditions. Cal OSHA has determined that COVID-19 is a workplace hazard since it is widespread in the community, and employers need to take proper precautions to protect workers who may be exposed to this infectious disease, such as physical distancing along with face coverings. I'll talk about more of that later. Additionally, under Title 8, Section 3457, field sanitation, employers are still required to provide soap and water to wash hands, clean and disinfect commonly touched items such as door handles, water jugs, chairs, etc., that employees may touch or be exposed to. With regards to an overview of the COVID-19 agriculture-specific guidance, Cal OSHA has been busy since late February and continuing to produce guidance for both employers and workers. Cal OSHA has a dedicated webpage specifically to COVID-19. It includes Cal OSHA guidance materials, resources, videos, and guidance from the California Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, commonly referred to as GoBiz. And also Cal OSHA has developed and posted the following guidance and training materials and resources and videos. Julie mentioned some of them briefly earlier, which we worked closely with Agriculture Labor Relations Board on. To date, as it relates to agricultural industry, we have developed COVID-19 daily checklists for employers. Those are both in English and in Spanish. We've also developed a general checklist for agricultural employers in both English and Spanish. We have developed infection prevention for agriculture employers and employees. This is in multiple languages and it's available in English, Spanish, Chinese, Vietnamese, and we're currently completing our translation of Punjabi. We've also developed a COVID-19 worker protection video, and this is really for employers and employees to both watch and provides them with important information that they can use to protect employees and prevent the spread of COVID-19 in the workplace. This is the video that Julie mentioned earlier, where we work with them on developing the transcript, obtaining still shots, videos, and other important information to include in the video. That is both in English and in Spanish, and we've also had it translated into Mixteco, which the ALRB participated in and actually produced for us. So I'd like to thank the ALRB for participating in that. Other guidance and resources produced with the Governor's Office, California Department of Public Health, and the California Department of Food and Agriculture are also agriculture, livestock, and statewide industry guidance. We also have an agriculture and livestock industry checklist for employers to utilize as well. We've also included other resources such as CDC and federal OSHA guidance for the meat and poultry processing, the CDC webpage for coronavirus 2019, which links to the governor's webpage, frequently asked questions on laws enforced by the California Labor Commissioner's Office, and UC Davis COVID-19 resources for agriculture that they've produced as well, which we think is very, very helpful to workers and employers. As far as some items that we're currently working on, we are revising and updating our current guidance to reflect the new guidance that has been put out by California Department of Public Health on June 18th as requiring face coverings in workplaces. We expect that to be posted and updated this week. We're also working on developing an employee self-evaluation that they can utilize to score and rate themselves to better understand their level of knowledge as it relates to COVID-19, and also evaluate the workplace that the employer may find helpful from their workers. We're also working on developing training modules that we plan to post online, which will be broken up based on the specific training requirements of an employer for their workers. And at the end of each of the training modules, there will be approximately 3 to 5 questions that workers can answer, submit, be scored on it, and then at the end of all of the modules, the employer can then certify that employees have completed the COVID-19 training that's been developed by Cal OSHA. We hope that that would be a tool that employers would utilize and be available for workers. As far as our public enforcement statistics, I do have current statistics as of June 21st. To date, Cal OSHA has received 3,050 complaints for all industries related to COVID-19. Specific for agriculture, we have received 26 complaints. Cal OSHA has received a total of 185 serious illnesses, 14 of which were in the agricultural industry. Cal OSHA has received 51 workplace COVID-19 fatalities, 2 of which are in the agricultural industry. All of the on-site inspections and investigations are still open, and therefore Cal OSHA has not issued any citations. As a result of those open inspections and investigations, I don't have any further information on them at this time to provide. As far as consultation services that are available for ag employers, Consultation Services has conducted 2,575 telephone-based consultation services as of March 1st, specifically related to COVID-19 for employers. They've also provided and have geared up to provide additional assistance to other state agencies. They've also provided qualitative and quantitative respirator fit testing to other state agencies who are participating in COVID-19 related events. And they've developed and are providing Zoom and similar based presentations on injury and illness prevention program, heat illness prevention, and other COVID-19 related topic matters. They are working with the Labor of Occupational Health Program, LOHP at UC Berkeley, the Offices of Emergency Services, many workers' compensation insurance companies, the Southern California Builder Safety Alliance, American College of Occupational Environmental Medicine, Radio Bilingue, and many others. To minimize exposures for both conventional consultation and voluntary protection programs, they're conducting as much administrative work as possible using Zoom video conference and other similar systems, as well as conducting on-site visits at early and late times where we reduce the amount of exposure. As far as outreach for workers, there's been a lot of discussion about this throughout this meeting so far, so I'd like to report on that. So far, Cal OSHA has been working with worker organizations, advocacy groups, and community-based organizations, and we're encouraging them to request assistance through Department of Industrial Relations outreach request process. When we receive this information, Cal OSHA, our outreach coordination program assigns a bilingual outreach trainer to provide outreach. In addition, we're developing news releases, social media posts, and we correspond with agricultural leaders throughout the state to share our guidance and information as it is released in real time. In addition, we are working with the Employment Development Department's Monitors Advocate Office and the Foreign Labor and Farm Worker Services Group to promote and share our guidance material, videos, and resources. This is particularly helpful because on November 2019, the Employment Development Department awarded $100,000 of the Wagner-Pizer 10% allocation funds to MyCop. And so they get involved with radio media solicitation proposals. Through the radio media grant, MyCop is developing and implementing radio and media strategies to conduct outreach to hard-to-reach communities, to inform them about workforce programs and other community services available to these workers and their families. This allows us to target the Mixteco and Indigenous Community Organizing Project, and they unite with Indigenous leaders and allies to strengthen the Mixteco and Indigenous immigrant community, particularly in Ventura County. The Department of Industrial Relations Communications Office is also coordinating and scheduling radio and TV PSAs. And then lastly, I was asked to talk about how workers can file a complaint with Cal OSHA if they feel they have an unsafe or unhealthful workplace. In case you're unaware, workers are allowed and they can file anonymous complaints to the nearest district office. And this can be done by looking up the office at Cal OSHA's website or filing a written email complaint online. We prefer that employees call so that we can obtain all the necessary information to properly conduct the investigation into their complaint. Employees' representatives can also file a complaint on behalf of the employee. These are treated as formal complaints, similarly to if an employee filed a complaint directly themselves. That concludes my presentation. At this time, if anyone has any questions that they would like to ask, I'm happy to answer them to the best that I can.
Thank you so much, Brandon. That was a lot of really great information. I certainly have some questions, but want to open up the floor to my colleagues to see if they have any comments or questions for you. Cynthia?
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. I'm just wondering if Cal OSHA has considered maybe utilizing alternative outreach methods for engaging workers whose best language may not be English or Spanish, or whose main language may not be within the forms or documents that have been translated. So I'm thinking something like popular education or different outreach methodologies that may assist with folks who have Indigenous languages that they speak as a primary language.
Right. So thank you for your question. And as I mentioned, we're working with EDD MAO and also MyCop. And so as we're translating the information into the Indigenous languages, we're trying to get the material into the hands of those folks who actually have those relationships and contacts with some of those folks who may not speak the traditional languages such as Spanish or English. And so, we were working at some point on grant funding to try to work more closely with some of these community-based organizations to try to use them as a channel to deliver a lot of information and guidance that we're developing. So at this point, we extend our hand out to many of these organizations. We do it telephonically. We also do it through email. And we've got several folks, I've worked with ALRB also, where we're trying to reach out to try to get to some of those hard to reach folks who may not speak those traditional languages.
Okay. Any of our, Ralph or Barry or Isidore, any questions? Why am I jump in on myself?
Well, I do have okay. Well,
go ahead, Barry.
Go ahead. Well, I actually have a follow-up question. I read recently that, and I don't know how accurate this was, that the some of these indigenous languages are basically largely unwritten, so that written materials in those languages actually won't really reach anyone. They have to hear it. It basically has to be spoken. I don't know how true that is, but if that is the case, or do you find that's the case? And if that's the case, then there would have to be a much more intensive personal system of communication to reach those workers.
Yes, and that's an excellent point. That's something that Cal OSHA discussed intimately with the ALRB when we were developing our video. We worked with a translation services company who also echoed your exact remarks that a lot of times the folks that speak Mixteco or some of these other indigenous languages, the written form of it may not be as helpful. So that's one of the reasons why when we developed the agricultural worker video, we were ensured to have that translated into Mixteco and then also have a voiceover in Mixteco. So therefore it was easier for that population to see the video and hear it in a language that they understand. And I should say, knowing that, our goal would be to have as many of our documents, translated in maybe an audio recording format, as long as it meets the ADA guidelines for online publication. So for those who maybe have difficulty reading in that particular indigenous language, it would be available to them in an audio format.
Okay, and I have another follow-up question about Cal OSHA procedure and enforcement in a pandemic, which is so ordinarily a worker makes a complaint about a working condition and you cite the employer and you tell the employer, fix the problem. Like, let's say, and I don't know, I assume this has happened somewhere, if not in agriculture, somebody calls up and says, we're working here and we're close to each other and there's no masks available. Do you, when Cal OSHA enforcement personnel go out to investigate, would they immediately make those masks somehow available? In other words, in a pandemic, it's like it's equally, if not more important, to get the mask to the worker rather than immediately try to figure out, when the employer gets a citation. Not to say they shouldn't be cited if they should be cited. That's not my point. My point is that the workers' lives may be in danger if they don't get masks right away, because you can transmit this disease so quickly and easily. So what happens in reality in that sort of circumstance?
Well, I mean, that's a very interesting question. And I mean, since this is a hypothetical, I must say that every case has its own set of facts and details and evidence that must be considered by the compliance officer. Cal OSHA does have specific tools in its toolbox. If it's determined to be an imminent danger that cannot be immediately fixed or corrected, then Cal OSHA can take certain actions to eliminate the hazard to those workers. As far as ensuring workers immediately get face coverings or face masks, as was suggested in your question, I mean, Cal OSHA currently does not have an inventory of those to hand out, so they would not be providing those to the workers, but we would certainly be ensuring that the employer mitigate that risk to the employees through some type of administrative controls immediately, and that could be separating workers so they're not working in close proximity. If they're working outdoors, certainly that does help. But they would want the employer to take immediate action to mitigate the risk to those workers. As far as requiring compliance with a regulation, that comes through a citation process. So as I mentioned earlier, many of those investigations are still ongoing and the facts are being collected and interviews are being performed. So In the interim, between the inspection and the interviews and the citation issuance, it would be a conversation that the compliance officer would have with the employer to ensure that they're made aware of what the requirements are for them to protect those workers.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, I may launch into a couple of my questions. One of the issues that I know it's a long-standing issue in agriculture in particular is challenges around availability of proper resources for hygiene, particularly like hand washing, which we know is so critical to reducing and mitigating the spread. What are you recommending to employers right now in terms of frequency, to allow their workers to hand wash? Kind of what are you seeing anecdotally? Are you seeing any best practices? If you could just talk about how that's going in the field.
Sure, and that's a good question. Thank you. A lot of this information is contained in our guidance documents as far as what employers should be doing. They should certainly be increasing the frequency of cleaning and disinfecting any areas that employees would come into frequent contact with. As I mentioned, restroom door handles, the water jugs that employees are, obtaining water from, any tools that maybe are being shared amongst workers, areas where they take their breaks or where they seek rest from heat. All of those areas, the best practices for an employer and what we would expect an employer to do is to ensure that they're frequently cleaning and disinfecting those areas that may have been touched or where an employee may have sneezed or coughed and created some potential form of infection for other workers. So as I mentioned earlier, we do have general sanitation that is enforced. A lot of that deals largely with the hygienic procedures that employees may be exposed to, but largely we have guidance that's out there. Employers are required to implement an effective injury and illness prevention program. We've identified that COVID-19 is a workplace hazard, and so employers really need to be vigilant to ensure that they're doing everything they can to ensure that those commonly touched areas are frequently cleaned and disinfected.
Okay. My next question is about face coverings or masks. Certainly there's been a lot of education around this, a lot of discussion. I think as members of the general public may, even if they're understand the importance of masks and try and practice that, they come in all different shapes and sizes, maybe different comfort levels, and certainly farm work can be very tiring and labor intensive. Is there anything in particular that Cal OSHA is recommending or enforcing for just general work in the fields that's not specialized in any case that may need like an N95 or best practices around face coverings and masks?
Well, Cal OSHA is following the guidance from CDC and also from the California Department of Public Health. And so we are recommending and advising that when you're working outdoors, that you're required to wear face coverings. As far as a level of comfort, I think to each individual, they fit differently, like you mentioned. So it would be suggested that employees find a face covering that they find comfortable, and they have to ensure that they wash it. If an employer is providing the face coverings to the workers, then they should allow for different sizes, different materials for the employees that may want to use them, or that are required to use them, I should say. So, for those that are working in the agricultural industry at this point, it's face coverings. It's not an N95 unless there's an additional specific hazard, such as, just other things that they may be exposed to that actually are requiring an N95 respirator or some other type of elastomeric respirator. But for those that are just performing regular agricultural work, a face covering is sufficient at this point.
Okay. And you mentioned that there's no specific OSHA standard around COVID-19 or this novel virus, but is there any enforceable standard that may encapsulate either not providing face coverings or if employees are working and not wearing face coverings?
Certainly. So as I previously mentioned, Title 8, Section 3203, it's a performance standard. So it really is it requires the employer to evaluate unsafe work conditions and protect employees from those hazards. Cal OSHA has identified COVID-19 as a workplace hazard because it's community-based widespread transmission. And so therefore employers are obligated to protect their employees from that hazard. If it's determined that employers are not protecting employees from the potential transmission of COVID-19, then there could be violations under Title VIII, subsections A4 for failing to identify an unsafe work condition, or potentially subsection A6 for failing to correct an unsafe work condition. So even though there's not a specific COVID-19 standard that's been promulgated and adopted, we do have a horizontal standard, which is the Injury Notice Prevention Program, which applies to all employers.
Got it. I also want to go to kind of what employers are required to do in terms of reporting instances of COVID-19 to Cal OSHA. Are they required, if they learn that someone on their workforce has tested positive, are they required to report that to Cal OSHA, or are there only certain circumstances, and how does that work?
Yes, employers are required to report that to Cal OSHA. We've actually created a frequently asked question on our COVID-19 webpage that gives specific examples and instructions to employers. In our guidance and our FAQ, we encourage employers to err on the side of caution and report those to Cal OSHA and record them in their log 300 also when it's been determined to be work-related.
Okay, so even if it's unclear where the employee may have contracted the virus, they're encouraged to report that to Cal OSHA and record it.
That's correct.
Got it. Okay. This has been so interesting, and I just want to thank you for all of your efforts and your partnership and some of the outreach that Cal OSHA has done with the board, and for the voluminous amount of materials that you guys have produced, and also your effort to translate them in multiple languages. I think that's really critical. Are there any other questions from my board members? And if not, we will go to our next panelist. Okay, Brand, if you can also just stick around in case there are questions or comments during the public comment, that would be wonderful. And I really appreciate you taking the time to join us today. I know you guys are extremely busy. Please join me in welcoming our second panelist from the Labor Commissioner's Office, Connor Schmedding, who will be informing us about the Labor Commissioner's efforts to provide outreach and education, and also enforcement around COVID-19 in agriculture. Connor?
Hey, thanks, Chairwoman Rashid. So let me start out with for those of you who aren't familiar with the Labor Commissioner's Office, the central mission is to ensure a just day's pay in every workplace in the state and to promote economic justice. My job is to oversee the Labor Commissioner's field enforcement team in the Oakland District Office. I also lead the statewide team that focuses on strategic enforcement in the ag industry. Today, I'm going to cover a couple things. I'm going to cover the executive order on supplemental paid sick leave, the impact we're seeing the pandemic have on workers, our response to that, and efforts, just general efforts we have that where we're trying to improve our outreach to ag workers. So our website is a great resource. It has a lot of charts, tables, and information, and frequently asked questions all about the pandemic and the protections that are available to workers. Please feel free to interrupt if you have questions. I'm happy to pause to clarify as I go if that's easier. So Executive Order N5120 that was issued on April 16th fills the gap for paid sick leave that was left by the Families First Coronavirus Response Act that Congress passed. If you go to our website, you can find a table with a side-by-side comparison with the FFCRA that compares not only the supplemental paid sick leave with the FFCRA, but also with, I believe, California paid family leave and the state paid sick leave law. That's law, regardless of whether the pandemic's in effect or not. So specifically, this executive order provides supplemental paid sick leave for food sector workers working for employers with 500 or more workers nationwide in any of the three following circumstances. So one, the worker is subject to a COVID-related quarantine or isolation order. Two, the worker is advised by a healthcare professional to self-quarantine or self-isolate related to COVID. Or three, the worker is prohibited from working by the employer due to concerns related to potential COVID transmission. So this supplemental paid sick leave protections are especially important in light of the recent outbreaks we've been seeing in the food sector, across the state, especially in the fruit and meat packing plants. It turns out that I believe I read something recently that ag workers made up all the COVID cases. So there are a couple additional requirements to qualify for the supplemental pay.
Connor,
Yes.
Connor, sorry to interrupt you. Can you repeat that last piece about what you read recently? Because it cut out, at least where I am, just briefly, and it sounded interesting. My ears were perked.
I read that
out here too. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, I found an article that said that half of the ag workers made up half of all COVID cases in Monterey County, and I think that's pretty significant. Okay, there are two additional requirements for qualifying for the supplemental paid sick leave. The worker must be working outside. He can't be working from home. As it relates to ag workers, food sector work must be covered by one of the four Industrial Welfare Commission wage orders. Order 3, which covers canning, freezing, preserving. Order 8, which covers processing of another entity's ag products after harvest. So an example would be a commercial packing house. Order 13, where the workers are preparing ag products for market on the farm where the products were produced. An example would be a packing shed. And Order 14, which covers ag occupations not covered by the other 3 orders. So basically, if you work in ag, you're covered. As far as calculating the amount of paid sick leave that a worker is entitled to, it's basically going to be the average of 2 weeks pay. So for full-time workers, that they're going to be entitled to 80 hours of supplemental paid sick leave. And for part-time workers, whether they just started or they've been working or they work a varied schedule, you basically just would average out a 1 week or 1 week would be and multiply it by 2, or just take an average 2 weeks. The rate of pay used in calculating the benefit is going to be the worker's regular pay, which can't be less than the higher of the state or local minimum wage that's in effect. The benefit's capped at $511 a day, or a total benefit of $5,110. One exemption to the executive order is for employers that provide an existing supplemental paid benefit program specifically for COVID purposes that was in effect by April 16th that either meets or exceeds the executive order's requirements. One thing that I think is really important to note about the supplemental paid sick leave is that like with the regular paid sick leave law, employers can't require a health provider certification before providing the supplemental paid sick leave. They can't require doctor's notes. As far as enforcement, workers can file wage claims with our office if their employer denies them use of their supplemental paid sick leave. And they can also file retaliation claims with our office if the worker is retaliated against by the employer for requesting or using their supplemental paid sick leave. So, general retaliation. One of the things that I think we're going to see a lot more of is, outside of the supplemental paid sick leave, workers would also be protected from retaliation if their employer retaliates against them for making a complaint either to them, the employer, Cal OSHA, or another health and safety agency about workplace health and safety issues at their job. So this isn't new, but I think that we're going to probably be seeing this more in the future as the pandemic progresses. A couple things we've been seeing since the pandemic started. In addition to the regular things that we usually see, we're hearing from a lot of workers who are out of work and are having difficulty accessing either the unemployment benefits through EDD or the immigrant disaster relief assistance available to undocumented workers. I'm sure you probably read articles in the paper about EDD being overwhelmed by the volume of calls that are coming in. I think I heard from one worker who said that he called all day for days on end and was still unable to get through. We're also hearing a lot about workers who are unable to make rent and being threatened with eviction despite protections in place at the state and local levels, as well as, and for those who do have jobs, a lot of people are being exposed to COVID at work and getting their family sick because their jobs don't allow them to socially distance effectively. And we've heard from some of our community-based organizations that's been especially true for ag workers. So far, some of the things that we're doing in response to the pandemic. So over 300 of our staff within the department volunteered to provide assistance to EDD's call center over Memorial Weekend, and we were able to help them process over 39,000 unemployment claims that were in their backlog. Another thing that our office is exploring is proactively notifying businesses subject to supplemental paid sick leave requirements about the requirements of the order, and also possibly issuing separate notices to smaller businesses that are subject to the local to a local city or county supplemental paid sick leave provision. We're also looking into a few businesses that we've received complaints about for not providing supplemental paid sick leave. So, and kind of the last thing I wanted to talk about, it's not specifically COVID related, but I think there are a lot of parallels in terms of, the drive to leverage technology to connect with people remotely. So within the division's field enforcement unit, we have statewide strategic teams that are dedicated to 7 different industries in the underground economy, one of which is ag. The goal of the team is to find strategic approaches to enforcement to create industry-wide change and ensure that workers get paid. Each of the industries consists of field enforcement staff and at least one community-based organization partner. On the ag team, we partner with CRLA and MyHop, which I've heard mentioned here today. So one of the things we're looking at doing is using social media and maybe possibly specifically Facebook to raise awareness to communities, to post training videos about workers' rights, which would allow us to reach more workers who maybe don't speak English and are more comfortable speaking a native language like Mixteco or Tupi. We want to raise awareness and get the word out about the services that we offer and the rights that workers have. We're also hoping that social media can help us maintain contact with certain worker communities so that we can locate them when we have money. One of the biggest problems we have in ag enforcement is the inability to locate workers when we actually receive wages for them. I don't know about ALRB's process, but on our end, it can take years to go to, from the start of an investigation until we've collected money. We have an investigation, we have an audit, we have an appeals process, we have judgment enforcement, we search for assets, we have to go collect, and then we have to deal with issuing checks and contacting workers. And so that can take 3 years. And if we're not able to contact the worker, what we do is we end up having to put the money into an account so that the worker can come forward and claim that money later. And in my experience, I'm not aware of any workers who've come forward afterwards after we put money into that account. So, one thing that we're hoping social media can help us with is, maintain the contact with the workers, because, even if we do have phone numbers or physical addresses for workers, chances are, because of the migratory nature of ag, they're probably going to have a different number and a different address in 6 months. So we're hoping that can help us just be more effective in our outreach and enforcement, and make our enforcement in ag that much more meaningful. So that kind of wraps up what I was going to talk about. Are there any questions?
I have a couple. Just one, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us and give us this overview. I think it's really important to know the Labor Commissioner's Office is such a vital link and resource for workers. So I really appreciate you taking the time to inform us. You answered one of my questions, which I just think bears repeating, which is that workers can take advantage of this specific COVID-19 specific paid sick leave without having a doctor's note. I think that's really critical given the lack of insurance coverage, access issues, costs, et cetera. So I think that's really important. One of my questions that it came up, frankly, when I was at DIR that I was particularly troubled by, given our population, is whether you're getting calls from workers that are concerned during shelter in place or stay at home orders that may be stopped by public agencies asking where they're going or why they're outside the house. I've heard some anecdotal reports about that. And I don't know if you've gotten any questions about that or if workers are utilizing any best practices to show that they are, in the car outside their home on their way to or from work.
Yeah, that's interesting. I personally haven't heard of anything like that happening. I think that at least in our area, I think law enforcement has generally been, or public health officials have generally been pretty understanding. And when workers explain where they're going and why they're out, they haven't had a problem.
Well, that makes me happy to hear. I hope that's widespread.
I mean, I'm happy to check. I mean, I'm happy to check and get back to you if that would be helpful.
Yeah, that'd be great. I just,
Okay.
as the state's reopening, my hope is that that's less of an issue, but I'd heard that anecdotally and it was obviously very concerning. I'd like to open it up to some of my colleagues and see if they have any questions or comments. Anyone on the phone or on WebEx of my colleagues? Okay. Well, thank you so much, Car. I really appreciate you taking the time. If you can just stick around. Our next agenda item is public comment. And we may have some members of the public that have questions for you. So item number 12, our next agenda item is actually item number 12. And so I just want to reiterate that we are going to be planning a second public meeting in August related to COVID-19. We want to focus again and hear from workers, community-based organization, and employers on how all of the things that we've been learning about today are working on the ground. What are kind of the new trends as this pandemic and the way that we cope and deal with it evolves. So please look out for that for our next meeting. We have not determined the date, but it will be sometime in August. I also want to note that we are going to have our regional directors meeting starting at 2 p.m. Please see the agenda posted on our website, alrb.ca.gov. It has a different WebEx meeting ID and call-in number, so it is different from this meeting, but we hope you'll join us and get a report on what's going on in our regional offices. We are now on to our final agenda item, number 13, public comment. Please be advised that the board is unable to adjudicate, comment, or resolve any pending case matters before the board. I will ask our Executive Secretary, Santiago Avila Gomez, to go first through the queue and then open it up. If you have technical difficulties or we miss your turn, we will work to come back to you. Please remember to be on mute unless you are speaking. If you require translation, please advise us. And can the interpreter share that last bit of information, please?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Damas y caballeros, estos son los comentarios públicos que van a presentar ahora. El señor Santiago va a facilitar el asunto. Y si alguien tiene algún tipo de pregunta que le quieren hacer aquí al comité, por favor, hagan su pregunta y yo voy a estar acá para sus servicios, para traducir del español al inglés. Así que con eso dicho, si hay alguien que tiene algún comentario, por favor, le indica al señor Santiago para facilitar las preguntas al comité. Gracias. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Santiago, do we have any people in the queue who would like to make public comment?
Yes, Noe Paramo. Noe, you are cleared to make your public comment.
I'm unclear for our commenter. If you could, you may be on mute.
I'm going to attempt to unmute everyone at once here to try to identify the phone line. I believe that the commenter is called in. Okay.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Okay.
Good afternoon.
I'm going to identify his line, and in the interest of time, I did see a hand up earlier from Michael Marsh. Mr. Marsh, if you are there and wish to comment, you may do so now by unmuting yourself. No. I'm working on identifying the line now. Hello, Noe?
Yes. Hello.
Excellent.
Can you hear me?
Go ahead.
This is Noe. This is Noe.
You may
Am
make
I
your public
on?
comment.
Good afternoon, board members, staff. I'm Noe Paramo. I'm with California Rural Legal Assistance Foundation. And as you hold your first hearing on COVID-19's impact on the agricultural industry and farm workers, I want to make several recommendations, and one of which is to have the ALRB partner with the other labor enforcement and health agencies to do 3 things, and they have subsets. So one is perform audits of illness and injury prevention plans, observe how the workers are being trained and protected, and see what is actually happening in the fields and packing facilities. And we are working with community-based organizations statewide, and we're convening gatherings with the agencies and the governor's office to share these stories on the ground as they're happening. 2, ensure that when there is a workplace infection, agricultural employers take the corrective action, such as the deep cleaning, determine work-related contributing factors, inform other workers, guarantee that infected workers receive care, and that close contacts are quarantined with compensation for time off work. And 3, require every county to collect and report the occupations of persons testing positive for COVID-19 to track outbreaks and enhance prevention. We've seen an inconsistent gathering of data. 80% of the data is missing for farm workers, and only 20% of that is, and only a couple of counties are doing that. We need to have a broad approach to this to make sure each county is tracking this so we know what is going on. This is too important to protect our food supply and our farm workers in this $50 billion agricultural industry. And we just need to make sure that we protect our families and in contact with the workers. And many of what was discussed today, we're hearing from on the ground from these community-based organizations. We even heard about the anecdotal story that was just addressed in terms of contact with public agencies at their shelter in place, and you're an essential worker and you're going out. So we're in contact with the Sacramento immigration advocates, and we're also monitoring that aspect that relates to public agencies, law enforcement, ICE, in contact with essential farm workers. And we really look forward to August, to when the meeting's held, when community-based organizations can participate meaningfully and effectively to really share this data and information that's being gathered statewide. So thank you very much for your time, and appreciate all the work and the presentations and testimonies given here today. Good evening, good afternoon.
Thank you so much for your thoughtful comments. Really appreciate it. I was taking notes. In some of these cases, we do not have jurisdiction over these areas, but we are partnering both with our other labor agency partner agencies like Cal OSHA and like the Labor Commissioner's Office and like EDD and others to get information out there, and thinking of new and creative ways to do that, and certainly need the partnership of our community-based organizations to really be effective in our goals. I'm also so pleased that the administration has really taken this collaborative interagency approach and really worked to get government entities and community-based organizations working together to address where there are gaps. And certainly there are a few things that I've heard today that I want to be following up on, and really hope to continue this conversation with you and others in August. Anyone else have comments?
Thank you.
Thank you. Santiago, do we have any other members, public comment members in the queue?
At this time, there's no one else that's indicated that they wish to make a public comment.
Okay. All right. Well, in that case, if there are no additional members of the public that would like to make public comment, I'd like to once again thank all of our presenters today. It was incredibly informative. And I know this is a very hectic time and you are all on the front lines doing important work. So I really appreciate you taking the time to make these presentations and help inform us. As we anticipate, we're going to be seeing these issues come across us through our work at the board. I also appreciate all of the staff who made presentations today, as well as all of those, Ed, Santiago, Audrey, who all worked together to ensure that we were able to do this meeting. This is our first time doing this virtual conference, and it was a lot of prep work, and so really appreciate that. Also like to reach out to my colleagues at DIR who helped give us some technical advice in the lead up to this meeting. Very, very grateful for that as well. Thank you to everyone. We appreciate your testimony. The public meeting is now adjourned and the record is closed.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Santiago.